95% of work that happens in companies is a complete waste of time. So we had to close half the company. We closed Australia, closed the US, and then over time got rid of the 10-person marketing team. We got rid of the 20-person sales team. The number of sales did not change. We were just doing busy work as a company.
How do you assess what work is busy work?
It's just that constant process of questioning. Is this really moving the needle? And the biggest challenge there is that we kid ourselves. There were lots of things that I've done in the past where I've rationalized that this is 100% the right thing for us to do as a company, when actually it's been my ego. One of the hardest things for any startup is really figuring out like what your reality is and like what the game you're playing is. And the more your mental energy can be on that, the less it's on
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a long time coming.
It has been a long time coming, but worth the wait.
100%. Yeah. I got excited by our pod on the Unfiltered, and it's been you've been on a journey, and so I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation like at the transition.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's a very interesting time. I feel like it'll almost be a bit of a therapy session for me, because I think it has been a bit of a whirlwind few weeks, which we can get into, and there's a lot of unprocessed stuff in there. So I think, almost this format here with you, I'm sure will help me to process as well.
So for everyone listening, can you give an intro and share what people should know about Hector Hughes?
Yeah, for sure. So I struggled to get a job at university. So a friend of mine suggested applying to startups, because I think that was lower hanging fruit. So I applied to 20, and one of them offered me a job, which was an iPad-based till system called Nobly POS. So I spent 3 years there, did a whole bunch of roles, which I was rubbish at. Not being humble, was really pretty bad at them all. Did sales for a year, then I ran product for a year, and then ran growth for a year. But it was a lot of fun, and really enjoyed being in the startup environment. And I think, just like for the first time in my life, felt engaged with something. And then I burnt out, went to a silent retreat in the Himalayas, and came back and quit my job to found Unplugged, which is what I'm doing now.
You said you were rubbish at all those jobs at Nobly PS, but you became head of growth?
Yeah.
They kept on promoting you?
It depends. They kept moving me, definitely. But it just kind of, so I did sales for a year, and I'm, wasn't still not a particularly good salesman, too kind of English and self-deprecating and all of these things. And after a year, I said to them, I was like, guys, look, I just don't know if it's working. Like, maybe it's time for me to move on. And I think they were having a conversation with themselves around, like, oh God, do we need to get rid of Hector? And then they were like, no, don't leave. Why don't you? We need someone to look after product, so you can take that over. Because we didn't have a product manager in the company, and I, have a kind of mathsy brain, so a bit more like logical. So I thought it might be a better fit. So I did that, and it was a real case of the blind leading the blind. So we had a development team out in Uruguay, and I was, there was no product experience in the company, and so I was just making stuff up as I went along. So it was a lot of fun. I was probably better than I was at sales, but still not very good at it. It was a bit of a mess, but we kind of made progress, got there. And then towards the end of that, all of these stints were a year. Towards the end of that year, I started helping out the head of marketing just with tracking some numbers, and that evolved into then almost kind of creating the company's growth department, which eventually we eventually got rid of the whole marketing team and just was left with growth. But then around the time of my silent retreat, the company went through a big desizing. So we had expanded internationally, we then disbanded. And so I obviously didn't do the best job as a head of growth. But a lot of fun, learned a lot of great things, met a lot of great people, and took a lot of those lessons on.
Can you highlight one or two of those main lessons?
One is around culture, and what we really got wrong there is we didn't create a environment of psychological safety. Like, it became too much about like whose fault was it, and so then fundamentally the company was very quickly divided. So between the developers in Uruguay and the people in London and the bosses and everyone, so it felt like definitely the founders lost the dressing room. We as a company lost a good culture, and as soon as that was gone, it was just kind of downhill from there. You almost poison the pool, I think. Once people are in that negative mindset of like, the bosses are out to fire us and everything's terrible, it just compounds. So I think the learning from that is you have to create psychological safety and just get away from this culture of blame. So when something goes wrong, it's not about whose fault it is. It's about like, how do we solve it? Because people make mistakes all the time. And so something we spoke about earlier is my lesson or strategy I've taken out of that is to just assume everything's my fault in my mind, because then it takes any focus away from like, okay, who can we blame for this? And it just puts me in the problem solving mindset of like, okay, what's the best path forward? So I found that really useful, and that directly came from that experience. And the other one is that 95% of work that happens in companies is a complete fucking waste of time. That's really, especially I look at myself, that last year as head of growth, over 95% of the stuff I did didn't move the needle at all. Could have taken it all away and nothing would have changed about the company. And as a company, we grew to 70 people. We had offices in 4 countries. We had a 10-person marketing team and probably a 20-person sales team, and maybe more at the peak. And after we basically were trying to raise a big Series A, we're losing £300,000 a month. That Series A fell through. So we had to close half the company. We closed Australia, closed the US, and then over time got rid of the 10-person marketing team. We got rid of the 20-person sales team in the UK. The numbers did not change. The number of sales did not change after we got rid of all those people. And you just realized that we were just doing busy work as a company. And I would put a lot of money on that being endemic in any organization, where there are obviously some that are amazing executors, but I think most of what we do, most of the time, is just busy work and it doesn't really move the needle.
So then how do those play out in practice within Unplugged? How do you assess what work is busy work versus work that's actually moving the needle?
It's just really questioning, do we need to do this? And I think the biggest lesson there is just focusing on simplicity, because as a company grows, there is just this creep towards complexity. You get this compounding complexity of, we just do this project and take on this thing, and suddenly you just start to do all these things. So it's really just questioning, do we really need to do this? And just reminding people. So one of our values is to keep it simple. Just try and remind people as much as possible. Just keep it simple, keep it simple. And every now and again, it is just having a bit of a refresh. And it's like, we could just stop doing all these things and not much will change. So I think it's just having that focus of like assuming that most of the stuff we're doing is not going to move the needle, and then just seeking it out and just reminding it. And it's very easy to believe that and still end up doing a whole load of stuff that doesn't move the needle myself. But yeah, it's just that constant process of questioning. Is this really moving the needle? And the biggest challenge there is that we kid ourselves, right? That we rationalize it. We think, it is important for all these things. Like one of the things we spoke about earlier is a lot of the things I was doing, whether it be posting on LinkedIn or, doing our own podcast, definitely there were tangible long-term benefits when done well, but it's very easy to get those caught up with ego and actually overweigh the benefit versus the cost. I think massively underestimate what the opportunity cost of something like that is because of ego, you know? So I think there were lots of things that I've done in the past where I've rationalized that this is 100% the right thing for us to do as a company, when actually it's been my ego and it's not the right thing.
And so then how do you come to that place of clarity yourself, or that realization?
It's almost giving yourself the space to think about it. So it's journaling, whatever it is, but questioning yourself. And it's stopping to think, you know, because I think that's almost the hardest thing to do. We spend all of our time charging straight ahead. And so often with startups, we are behind on something, or, you know, we're failing to achieve some target, or, you know, we need to raise the funding round or hit the sales target, whatever it might be. So we're riddled with insecurities about we're going to fail to hit that, and we're going to look like a failure, and whatever else it might be. And I think that almost acts as blinkers, where we just feel like we need to kind of charge ahead and, you know, keep banging our head against the wall to get the funding round done, or whatever it might be. And that is not conducive to realizing, you know, when you're heading in completely the wrong direction. So I think it's getting yourself out of that mindset of like this kind of busyness. The times that I've worked the longest hours in my life are the times when I've been the most insecure, and I've thought I need to make up for it by just like being busy. Because then me putting in the long hours in my unconscious mind is rationalizing that I'm being productive, you know, and I'm doing everything it takes, when actually the smart thing would probably be to step away and just really think, are we heading in the right direction?
Lots of founders speak about the ego, or lots of people in general speak about the ego. And I understand it to some level, but I don't think I understand it at a really deep level. Can you explain how the ego shows up when being a CEO? Like, what are some great examples of times that you've been or felt ego driven?
Well, I think where I would go with it is everything that shows up as a problem for us fundamentally has some ego at its core. So if you look at any challenge you face as a company and why it's such a problem for you right now, so it's like, you know, maybe the big problem is that our new product is delayed, and that's keeping me up at night as the CEO. And the reason that is because maybe I'm worried that if we don't get the product out, I'm not going to be able to close the funding round, or we're going to have to, you know, shut the company down, or whatever it might be. And it all comes back to this fear of failure. And that is ego, you know? It's, if we don't get this thing done as a company, then this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and I'm going to look like a failure, you know? And I think you can strip down pretty much every problem in a company to that. And it's realizing that, you know, it doesn't matter. None of it matters anyway. I heard a great story that some founder shut down his company, and one of his investors who'd kind of been there and done it emailed him and said, congratulations, now you realize that it doesn't matter. And I think it's that. I think being a founder is such a hard job psychologically. I mean, that's the challenge, right? It's the psychological challenge. And it all comes back down to a fear of failure. And fear of failure is looking bad in front of the tribe, you know? It's, what will people then think of me if I fail? You know, nothing happens. You're not going to die. You know, there are cases when maybe you have a family and you're not going to be able to feed the family and whatever it might be. But for most entrepreneurs, it is this, they're probably doing the business in the first place to look good, to show the world how smart they are, myself included. And that fear of failure is this almost looking bad on that dimension in front of people. It's, hey, then people aren't going to think I'm as smart as I think I am. You know, like if we fail, then people aren't going to have me on this pedestal. And so it's really just understanding that and getting to knowing that that's at the root of things to move forward.
If you're like me, you probably skip most of these sponsor reads. So here's the deal. If you give me 1 minute of your time, I'll give you 1 minute of my suffering at 3 degrees Celsius. because today's sponsor is Monk Ice Baths. Now, you've probably heard the hype around cold water therapy and the benefits that it has on your mental health with reduced stress and improved sleep, and then your physical health with muscle recovery and improved circulation. And maybe you've even put together a little DIY version where you turned a chest freezer into an ice bath. Really f***ing cold. Or you've bought one of those basic cheap crap versions, both of which come with a lot of complications. That's why Monk is your best bet, because it's... I've really lost my train of thought. Which is why Monk is your best option if you're looking to seriously invest in your mental and physical health. Backed by elite athletes like Anthony Joshua, Monk is the most professional and accessible ice bath there is. So, if you're looking to be an elite performer and invest seriously in your mental and physical health, then go to discovermonk.com and use code SCALEWITHSOUL at checkout for a £100 discount, or go to the link in the description. Now, I love this, so I'm going to stay in for a bit longer, but I think you should get back to the episode. It's interesting. I was stressed yesterday or 2 days ago, sitting right there, head in hands, like, I just don't know what I'm doing. I don't know, like, where I'm spending my time. I don't know, like, how I feel so lost. And Lara came and consoled me. I'm just like, what's going on? It's like, I'm stressed. Things aren't going right. And she said something pretty much exactly as per what you're saying, which is like, how much is your ego in this? And I was like, whoa, this is not the time to have this. I'm not ready to have this conversation right here, right now. I was like, I've got to cool, I've got to be busy, I'm doing stuff and being productive. And I was like, well, let's have this conversation later, which we actually didn't end up doing, but we've circled back on it, and I'll check in this morning. And so it's shining a light on me, everything that you're saying.
It's tough, right? Like, I think it's very natural as humans. We are just all motivated by our own place, and like, we're tribal animals. You know, we do care about how we're viewed as a tribe, and so I think it does tap into something kind of very deep within us. And trying to do this very unnatural thing, like starting a company, really sends that haywire, which I think is why it is so tough psychologically.
So what's the other side of the ego? What does not being driven by it or putting our decisions through that egotistical filter look more like?
So it's definitely not binary. I think if you completely suppress your ego, you probably wouldn't be running a company. So there's an interesting thing. I met with my old boss from the startup the other day, and he was talking about some kind of trauma that he'd basically done some work on after leaving the company. And he said, I don't want to kill all of my trauma because I want to go and do the next startup. And like, I need a bit of that, but just like maybe bring it down a few notches. I think there's a lot of that, which is you are trying to do this very unreasonable, very unnatural thing. And so actually you kind of need that fear of failure and that ego to drive you along. That being said, I think when it comes to decision making, as you mentioned, the ego definitely gets in the way, and you end up optimizing for the wrong thing. You end up, worrying about how I'm going to look in this rather than like, what is the best path forward here? So I think where ego becomes an issue in decision making is it just clouds judgment. It's really focusing on what the reality of the situation is, because it's so easy. As soon as ego gets caught up in it, then that becomes the focus. Our focus, our mental energy is going towards how do we look in this situation, and how does this impact me, rather than what is the truth of the situation here. And I think one of the hardest things for any startup is really figuring out like what your reality is and like what the game you're playing is. And the more your mental energy can be on that, the less it's on the ego. And I think when I spoke about the previous startup, the culture being an issue. In that environment, everyone's focused on their ego. It's focused on whose fault is it, and the employees in the company are feeling like, am I going to get fired? How do I look in this situation? That's where all of the mental energy is. Whereas if you can get to a culture where ego is out of the question, then everyone can come together about like what is the best path forward, and it basically just requires an intellectual humility where people are interested in what the truth is rather than whose fault it is and how it impacts me.
I'll circle back to how you screen for that in your hiring process. But first, I'd love to shine light on this amazing quote that you said just before we started recording from Michael Lewis's book.
Yes, yeah. So it was from a character from Michael Lewis's book, who's a guy called Amos Tversky. So Amos Tversky was a long-term collaborator of Daniel Kahneman, who died recently, who's a Nobel Prize winner. And basically these two kind of completely transformed the field of behavioral economics. So before they came along, this was in the 1970s and 80s. Before they came along, everyone assumed that we were completely rational, and all economic theory was based on humans being rational players. And these guys basically discovered that we're not and proved it, and invented in doing so the field of cognitive bias. So brilliant guys. But Amos has a quote that I absolutely love, not so much connected to that, which is that the secret to good research is to always be a little underemployed, and that we can waste years by not being able to waste hours. So what that means is that this constant busyness is actually just wasting away our time. And sometimes the trick is to be a bit less busy, and that's when the real breakthroughs come.
And that then gives us this clarity on what is true,
100%.
what is the reality.
Exactly. Our perception of reality is our reality, right? So we're all living a filtered vision of the world, and that's wrong. Like all of us don't see the world as it actually is. We just see whatever vision of the world our brain has kind of created at some time. And so it's always about updating. There's a lot of talk of mental models in the last few years, popularized by Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. And it's updating your models of the world. And just, there's another one that the map is not the territory. So you're never going to have the perfect idea of what reality is, but you basically want to come up with keep updating it so that it's useful. And it's the same with a startup. Like, it is far too complex for us to understand everything that's going on. You have not only the company itself, but the industry, the changing consumer dynamics. Like that, you're playing in a system vastly too complex for you to completely synthesize. But it's about updating your models and understanding of the game you're playing to then help with decision making. So yeah, it is just this constant focus on what the reality of the situation is. And if your mental energy is on ego and people problems, then obviously you're not going to have a clear vision on that.
And so then how this is playing out in your life is you're taking long work breaks to Italy.
Yeah, so I mean that because one other element there, or another important element, is like how we are doing, as an individual. So how you are doing as an individual. And I think another easy mistake to make as a founder is to not prioritize yourself. And fundamentally, if you are not in a good headspace, then you're not going to turn up and do a good job for anyone, anyone in your life, the company, whatever it might be. So you kind of need to help yourself to help others. And where that's shown up for me, and I haven't got it right for the last few years, is I've had a kind of escalating series of autoimmune issues from about 4 years ago. So it started off during COVID, during the first lockdown. I was in just such a good headspace. I was about 6 months out of this silent retreat. I felt like I'd conquered life. I was never going to have any problems again, and was living a super healthy life, or so I thought. And then one day I just started getting this very painful burning rash, effectively immune system flare up that would last for 72 hours. It would keep me up during the night, and then it would go away. And then it was coming back every week at that point. So this was in the spring of 2020 during the first lockdown. And I couldn't figure it out. I went to an allergy clinic. They told me that it's not allergies, but take all these antihistamines, it'll keep it away. So that kind of worked, but then every time I stopped taking them, it would come back. So this went on for years, for 2.5 years.
Until you realised it was your ego.
No. I mean, I'm sure the ego played a big part, but 2.5 years of that. And then the symptoms started to get a lot worse. So about 1.5 years ago, I started to get basically like weeks of feeling rough and hungover. So all day I would feel like incredibly rough. And I actually went sober, ironically, 4.5 years ago. So since I went sober, I probably spent more days feeling hungover than the decade that I was heavily drinking. So that the last 1.5 years now has been that, basically just feeling rough. Probably 60 to 70% of days in the last 1.5 years, I felt like really rough. And I have not turned up anywhere like as well as I could for the people in my life, for the company. You know, I think when you're going through something like that, your intelligence is affected, your creativity is affected, your empathy is affected. And up until quite recently, my attitude was very much like, I just need to push through, you know, and just kind of endure. And because also the startup needed attention and whatever else it might be. But I think I recently got a diagnosis, which is, it's actually mold toxicity, so effectively mold poisoning from kind of household mold. And I now have a plan to go and treat that. And I've been doing that for the last few weeks, and still like life just gets in the way, you know, and there's the busyness and there's the stresses and strains of running a company. And I went to a dinner, and which is an organization called 9 Others, which is basically get 10 founders around a table on Wednesday. And I was trying to think what the challenge I was going to share was, and this is what's been occupying my mind. So I thought, may as well share that. And people were like, well, why don't you just take some time off? And that shouldn't occur to me. So I'm going to go and spend 5 weeks in a little village in Italy in August and just really get serious about recovering from this. Because until I do that, until I recover, I'm not helping anyone, you know, and I'm just being busy and and not being who, you know, people need and who I want to be. And I think there's a lot of ego in that, I think, you know, everyone needs me and I can't go away for any time. And you know, what will people do without me? But it's not true. Of course it's not true. They'll be fine. They'll probably thrive without me. And
Wow.
if I ever do want to help, you know, anyone in my life, I need to get myself sorted out first.
Sort of a combination of going slow to go fast, and like
Exactly.
make sure that your cup is full before trying to
Yeah,
pour into anyone else's,
100%.
especially when your cup's moldy.
Especially when your cup's moldy. Yeah.
Fair enough. And so then I feel like those physical health signs scream at us and they make us wake up to the fact that something's not okay.
Yeah.
But most of the time, the signs are so subtle and we don't see them. And there are things that are urgent as well as important. And this doesn't seem so urgent yet. But the longer that we leave it, it's going to become worse and worse over time. And that applies to physical health, but also mental health. And so how do you give yourself enough space to note these small signs that could build over time and then effectively take us out of the game?
Yeah, well, it's really hard because everything is just normalized. Like, you know, everyone tells you it's supposed to be hard and, you know, it's supposed to be suffering and whatever it might be. So a lot of these serious complaints are just written off as part of the job, basically. And I think it's understanding the power of being at our best. So I haven't been at my best for years, for like 2 or 3 years since I've like felt really good. And I think it's just not settling for less than that. And we all have the ability to get ourselves there. I mean, there are people obviously with chronic disease or whatever else it might be. But we can all seriously improve our health if we really get serious about it. But it's about priorities, and it's about how you order those priorities in your life. And it's just a simple case of understanding that if you put yourself at the top, it's going to benefit everything else, and you are going to turn up better for everyone else on that list. And so I think that needs to happen first. Like you just need to prioritize your own health and just understand that, you know, when your mental health is poor, when your physical health is poor, like you are not doing a good job at any of those other things, or you're not doing anywhere like as good a job as you could. So I think it's that. I think it's, just really understanding what's possible. And it's one of those where the only way you can really understand that is by experiencing it. So, I mean, I would urge anyone listening who is going through some health stuff, just prioritize getting that sorted out, and you'll be amazed what a difference it makes.
Yeah, what also comes to mind is that as the leader, our time and energy is leveraged through everyone we employ or everyone who looks up to us. And so the attitude and energy we bring to the office will likely ripple into everyone else. The mindset in which we make decisions, if it's not strong enough, those decisions won't be as sound as they could be, not rooted in truth and reality, and they will then ripple into everyone executing on those decisions. And so it's not just our time lost, it's the whole team's time lost.
100%. There's an amazing Harvard Business Review article, I'm not sure how they went about proving this, but claiming that the biggest impact on the bottom line is the mood of the leader. It's how you turn up each day. Because at that point, like every interaction you have, you are then sending energy either way into that person. You're either getting them hyped and feeling good. If they see that you're happy and healthy and excited and energetic, then they're going to mirror that. They're going to reciprocate that. But likewise, if they see that you're stressed and preoccupied and generally low energy, then that's also going to ripple, and they're then going to go and have conversations off the back of that. So you're right; it completely ripples through any company, and it's just understanding that it's not just about like hours worked. It's about how we turn up for those hours, and how you turn up is going to impact how everyone else turns up.
This same lens is sort of mirrored in running events. So like with founders, one of the best bits of feedback that I ever got at a retreat was by Justine Javier Borja, who brought tribes into founders, and now runs that as her business. She's incredible and very intelligent when it comes to people and dynamics. And I was running this retreat, and I was running about energetic, but like there's a lot to do, especially being the only person who's there like executing and operating the whole retreat. And I went round once everyone got to their rooms, like we just arrived at the retreat, and I was just going to check in, make sure everyone's like doing okay, like how you doing, getting settled in, everything all right with your room, all that jazz. And she was like, "Hey, dude, just come sit down for a second." And then she said, "Your energy is what everyone looks to, and how you're perceived sets the tone for how everyone else then shows up."
Yeah.
And so I didn't employ any of the people that were coming to that fun conference, that founders retreat. However, they're all still looking to me to set the example of what energy they're going to bring. And so it's like not just within our teams, but then it's also with pretty much anyone that we interact with. So the check-in this morning that I have with Lara, my girlfriend, was that she said you sort of push yourself to bring this energy to lots of your friends, and because like that's how you want to interact with them, and that's the energy you want to bring. And then when you come home, like you kind of drop that guard, and the energy I get is like, I'm tired, like I'm not feeling it. And then that impacts the ripple in terms of what conversations we have, how much satisfaction we get out of the relationship. It's like, it's actually so crazy. And I hadn't woken up to that fact. And so I think this sort of really stepping back and taking stock of who we are in every moment has more of an impact than what we do.
Yeah, and I think there's so much focus on time management as a society and so little on energy management, because inevitably we all do have our peaks and troughs throughout the day. And it's not just about how much time you spend on something, it's about how much of your best time each day, when you're feeling your best. And like really, I probably have 3 hours at the start of the day when I'm really feeling clear and energetic, and then just as the day progresses on a normal work day, you just get bogged down in emails and problems, etc. I know Jeff Bezos talks about he does all his big decision making meetings in the morning, because the afternoon you're just a completely different you're a completely different specimen. And I think it's just understanding that all energy is not equal, and then how can we really optimize and increase that. And you've seen it. I've been to retreats you run, and I think the energy you bring there, like that's what makes it, and like if you can really inject that, that's magical as well.
The other end of the spectrum, which I'm sure people listening would think, oh, but what about Elon? Everyone says, oh, but what about Elon? Aside from him being like a mad genius that we just cannot compare ourselves to, he speaks about what you work twice as long hours as someone else, you'll get twice as much done, and therefore you will outpace your competition because it all compounds. Plus that combined with the sort of culture that he brings to the companies, it's like you push so hard, and he pushes people to achieve things that they didn't think they can achieve. There's obviously lots of different aspects within this, but what comes to mind if someone says, oh, but what about Elon?
Well, I mean, that works for him. It really works. And I think it's also understanding like yourself as a personality and like how you work. And like all of his companies are just run on this intensity that he brings that's very based in trauma. He talks it's talked a lot about his complicated relationship with his dad, like, but as a kid, whatever it is. So like he just has this insane drive and work ethic, and that kind of intensity and drive does create the outsized results. Like whenever you see the Teslas or the SpaceXs of the world, like quite often it is someone who has had some some childhood trauma or whatever it might be that's really, really driving them forward. So I think that to do anything very difficult, like you do need this insane focus and work ethic. But I think within that, it's just understanding like, is that what's the reality? Is that actually happening? And are people actually completely focused on this all the time? And you've got the companies like Elon's companies where, they've really seemed to be executing to an incredibly high degree. But again, 95% of the work that happens is not that, right? And I think where we kid ourselves is a lot of people put in the hours to justify that, almost that, hey, this is so we can achieve this, when actually it is just to kind of cover up this insecurity or whatever it might be. And I think that happens a lot with startups. So it's really understanding under the bonnet, like what's actually going on here. I mean, the other thing about Elon is he's running however many companies. So the amount of hours he puts into each company, like, isn't 100 hours, whatever it might be. So that almost, I guess, challenges that assumption of you need to be working 100 hours all the time to do that. Like, there is just a kind of speed element where if you're iterating that fast and approach it with that intensity, like you are just going to grow something much, much quicker. But yeah, I think it's not extrapolating that back to, if I work longer hours, then I'm going to build a bigger company, because I think what those hours are is super important. And just also like tapping into like what really makes you work, you know, like if it is this trauma, need to prove yourself, and actually putting in the 100-hour weeks is what really kind of makes you run, then fine. But for most people, I think it's probably not that, and it's not that intensity. That it's about figuring out the reality, and that's always going to be a case of stepping away, taking the time off, and just really understanding that, are you going in the right direction? Because most companies, most of the time, are not going in exactly the right direction. I think what Elon does really well is they have a very clear vision, and they're very focused on getting to Mars or whatever it might be, and they're just executing against that plan. I think a lot of the time, startups are just heading in the wrong direction and wasting time, I think. So I think it's like, how do you really figure out that you're heading in the right direction? And for that, then there's a lot of benefit to slowing down and taking time off. And when you know where you're going, you got to do a bit of work for sure.
Yeah, and it's easy to pick out one aspect of someone like him and be like, oh, well, he just works 100-hour weeks, therefore I'll work 100-hour weeks. And you're like, no. He's a mad genius as well. And so maybe the clarity of his thought is that much stronger. And so then that leads to this clarity of direction and this vision. And then you times that by the amount that you work, and you get these outsized results. It's not any individual part. It's all of the different parts, which we can never have, because that's only unique to him. And so then it's more about, okay, what are all of our individual parts, and what balance of them makes the most sense for us?
Exactly. And I think it is just about playing to your strengths. Like, you know, I would be terrible at running a company like that, where, you know, he's a notoriously kind of bad boss, depending on how you want to define that, falling out with people the whole time, you know, screaming at people the whole time. Like, that works for him in the sense that that's how he operates, and that's how he achieves these outside results. Steve Jobs was the same. Like, they kind of need to be like that. But for a lot of people, like, they just wouldn't do a good job of running the company in that way. So I think it's also about playing to your strengths. And again, just not, as you say, not taking this person is working like this, so I need to do this to be a big success. I think you need to be unbelievably focused to make a startup successful, but that doesn't mean sat at a computer for 12 hours a day. I think that's the assumption I would challenge in there. How do you almost hack yourself to just keep figuring out the right path forward, you know? And you can take lessons from someone like Elon. Like, I read his biography by Walter Isaacson recently, and one of the things I loved in there was the talk of someone will tell him that something's going to take 3 months, and he'll be like, this needs to be done by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, you know, and they'll get it done. There's just so much inefficiencies of, we think something's going to take a year when actually it could be done next week. Again, it's just challenging all of those assumptions is you know, incredibly beneficial, but it's taking lessons and just really understanding your situation.
I suppose the easy thing to do is to go, oh, it's done that, therefore I'll do that. Like, that's the shortcut, right? Whereas the hard thing to do is to sit and be introspective and really understand what's driving me. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Where should I be focusing my energy to get the most results? And where am I lacking and need support? It feels like that's a definition of wisdom.
Yeah, and it's just understanding, again, like, what are your strengths? Like, Elon Musk is an incredible product tech person. So him really get into the weeds with every single decision that's happening adds a huge amount of value. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Richard Branson, who's a dyslexic and has a very easy time delegating and spends a lot of time windsurfing and doing all these things. he still, has been absolutely focused his whole career on building his business empire, but it doesn't mean that he's got into the weeds with every single decision. So I think you have these two kind of paths. I mean, there are many paths, but it's just looking at like there are two very different individuals there, and there's no right answer. I also think there's an interesting question, which is like, what is the goal? Like it's not. We don't all need to build the biggest company in the world. Richard Branson is probably not going to be the one to get us to Mars, but he's had an incredibly successful, I think, fulfilling career. Obviously,
and a fun life.
And a fun life, exactly. So there is no right answer, and there might be a right answer to the question of what's going to get the VC the biggest outsized return, and maybe it is the founder who's completely driven by a hell of a lot of childhood trauma, and they're just going to turn up 100-hour work weeks and and build the SpaceX or whatever it might be. But it doesn't mean that that's the right answer for whatever you are trying to do, because we're all trying to do different things. We're all driven by different things, and that changes throughout our life as well. I think a lot of people, and I think it really matters the journey that you go on, right? And like when all is said and done, are you proud of how that went, and did it align with your values? I think a lot of happiness comes from, is the way you're living your life aligned with your values? For a lot of people, living that life that Elon Musk lives just wouldn't lead to happiness. I mean, he's famous for saying that it doesn't lead to happiness for him. Someone asked him in an interview about how can people be more like Elon Musk, and he said, I'm not sure you'd want to be. So it's definitely a case of careful what you wish for. And again, it's like, it's all about the right question, and that comes back to the reality of the situation. And it's like really understanding like what that question is, of like, what am I trying to do here? Like what matters, because there is no right answer. It's not like every startup is a competition to who can get the most revenue, or who can sell a company for the most money. Like there's a million reasons to do a company.
So if we assume that people have clarity on wanting to build a company for whatever their reason is, then we take these two figures, the Elon and Richard Branson. The thing that they both share is this boldness. And you wrote a great article on the difference between being bold and being rash. Can you speak about the different examples that you gave for the dividing line between boldness and rashness?
So time will tell where Elon sits on there, but you've got a lot of the kind of, again, it comes down to like, what are you trying to achieve? Because you've got a lot of history's greats, so to speak, or it's always inevitably white men, but who gets put down as like the great men of history? It's people like Napoleon, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great. These guys all died young, which is probably one of the reasons that they're so remembered now, and unhappy. And so Napoleon, for example, he was bold, and it's why he achieved so much, because he would constantly double down and go into the next war and the next conquest and whatever it might be. But actually, that boldness was also rash, because he just kept doubling down until he lost. And one example I love that highlights this is there's something in gambling. There's a roulette system called the martingale system. And basically what happens is you put a bet down, and if you lose the bet, you double your bet.
You put a bet down on either red or black.
Red or black, yeah. One of the 50-50s, yeah, exactly. And if you lose, you double your bet, and you keep doing that until you win. And then when you win whatever your original stake was. You cover all the losses and you win your original stake. Now, that system is great if you have an unlimited bankroll, but the problem with it is, you can and do get these runs where you can lose 20 times in a row. And if you haven't got the bankroll for that, it's going to completely wipe you out. And what you get is these characters like Napoleon, they just keep doubling down. They keep doubling the bet. And the problem with that is at some point, you're going to lose. He just kept going to conquest until he got one wrong, which was the invasion of Russia turned out to be a disaster, and that led to his eventual downfall. And so that's what the rash side looks like. I guess on the boldness side, you get a lot of people who are very bold, but it's very calculated. So Jeff Bezos is a great example. Richard Branson, when he started Virgin Atlantic, the airline, he had a deal with Boeing where if it didn't work, they would get the plane back at the end of the year. So the worst case scenario is he'd lease the plane for 1 year, and that was it. So he did an incredibly bold thing, which is start an airline, which is a notoriously difficult and frankly bad business to be in. But he completely de-risked it for himself, where the worst case that would happen is he paid the lease for a year, and that was it. So he is someone who has made a career out of being bold, but has not been rash. So he's been very calculated. He's never bet the house, and he's built up this massive empire. Now, Elon Musk, you use an example. It's not, the story is still being written, so it's not clear where he falls in that. Like buying Twitter, potentially rash. So where he's going to end up on that, who knows? I think he does understand more about risk than most people, almost anyone. And so I think there are things he does that look incredibly risky, where we actually just don't really understand what risk is in that situation.
SpaceX, you could argue, is bold.
Yeah, exactly. Incredibly bold. A lot of people would have said that was rash. And the story goes that if that fourth launch had failed, then the whole company was shut down. So is that right? Maybe, maybe not. But then the flip side of that is, because it's such an audacious thing, then he probably would have found someone else to fund the next one, the next launch. And so there, it's like, it's not actually as rash as it looks, because with his particular genius, talent, whatever it might be, he was probably going to be able to keep getting that funded. So he definitely toes the line, because there's a little bit of survivorship bias that just because he hasn't blown himself up yet doesn't mean he won't. Again, there was a point in Napoleon's career when people were sitting there being like, wow, this guy's invincible and he's never going to lose. So I don't know. It'll be interesting with Elon. I mean, he's obviously now just runs 5 or 6 of the biggest and most successful companies in the world. And more importantly, I think he is pushing humanity to new limits, vastly faster than perhaps anyone ever has in history. So it'll be fascinating to see what happens. But then he has a lot of health issues. He had a lot of mental health issues, just due to how hard he pushed himself. So it's not inconceivable that there's a blow up along the way.
So if we then focus more on the bold side of the line, you mentioned your article that the way that Richard Branson is bold and not rash is because he understands the rules. Can you speak to some of the rules that come to mind when building companies, which act as the container for which we can dream big and be creative within?
Yeah, so it's just very simple things, like really understanding, like fundraising is a huge part of startups, really understanding the mechanics of that, and I think there's a big narrative around, how much money you raise is the marker of success, and actually the devil is completely in the detail, so what terms did you raise on? What are the implications of that for later on in the company's life? So it's just understanding all of these things. Like, there are companies that will announce £50 million funding rounds, but then they've got the complete golden handcuffs where they've got 2 times liquidation preference. So, if they sell a company for less than 100 million, they don't get a penny. And what you saw a few years ago is a whole load of companies doing these big marquee rounds, and then the market changed, and now they're completely underwater. So there are companies that were doing tens of millions of pounds in revenue, but now they do not have a chance of returning anything to the founders because they're so far underwater with the liquidation preferences. And so that is one example of just understanding, and that plays out. Funding is just a very tangible area to look at it, but you basically have these not so much rules, but just dynamics playing out everywhere across the business. So, when it comes to people, the market, the customers, how you structure the company, all of these things, then like what are those dynamics and like how do you play the system, So the people, the masters of it, the kind of Richard Bransons, the Jeff Bezos, just really understand how they play those dynamics to their advantage so that they can take these very big bets, but fundamentally they can keep playing and they're not, risking going bust.
And I suppose it's then there are some rules which span across all of the different aspects to the company. So Elon's very famous talking about first principles. You can assess each one of these aspects of the company from first principles. You can also apply the 80-20 rule. It comes back to Warren and Charlie's mental models, right? These are generally things that you can apply to each aspect of the business to help you get closer to that truth.
Well, that's it. And I think first principles is a really good way of thinking about it because it fundamentally is getting to the reality of the situation, which is the first principles of the situation. And when you do that and when the decision making comes from that place, you can completely de-risk it. So I think Amazon's a great example because on the surface, they've done these very, very like bold and potentially risky moves into new industries. And so as a startup, you might say, hey, Amazon launched into, Amazon Web Services, so why can't I launch this new product? What Amazon did that was really smart, and the way Bezos thought about this was if you look at all of their biggest costs 20 years ago, then he's turned all of those cost centers into the profit centers now. So, data was one of their biggest costs, fulfillment, payments, whatever it might be. And they've now basically, those are what those companies have become. So it was stuff that they were spending money on anyway. And by spinning off a business in that, then not only have they covered their costs, but they've uncovered this massive opportunity. So the worst case scenario would have been that, hey, at least they've managed to reduce their cost in it.
Or it didn't work. And I imagine they've probably tried to spin up lots of other things which didn't work, but the cost of trying it and experimenting didn't outweigh the potential long-term benefit of it working. It's I think there's the mental model is called like the barbell theory, where it's like there's a low cost on one side, and there's a very high potential upside, which then also works with like very low upside and a very high potential downside. So with that side of the equation, like texting while driving is very low upside, very high potential downside, whereas Amazon experimenting with AWS is potentially like low cost compared to the potential upside.
Exactly that. And I think that's where most people go wrong is they don't have that low downside, because if you're taking a lot of bets, you're going to lose some of them. And so if you can be playing games where it's asymmetric returns, if you can be playing games where your downside is always capped and sometimes you're going to catch a massive upside, then that's just going to keep stacking up and you're going to keep winning. You're going to lose some, but it's fine. But if you're playing these games where some of the downsides are massive, like bet the company massive, then keep playing it enough. It's Russian roulette, right? You're going to lose one of them. So I think that's the problem is people do these crazy bet the company things and they just keep doing them, even if you win. And inevitably, law of large numbers, if you keep playing it, you're going to lose one of them. And again, it comes back to like really understanding the situation. Like what is the reality of this? Because it's so complex, right? Like it's not just a simple financial decision. There are so many things to weigh. There's like the potential learnings, there's the potential opportunity cost, there's all of these things. And so to be able to synthesize that and to make a good judgment, I think that's what someone like Elon Musk or Richard Branson is really great at. Like that's why I say Elon Musk just has a much better understanding of risk than almost anyone. And it allows him to make these decisions because he really understands that even though buying Twitter looks like an incredibly irresponsible financial decision, like that has so much benefits to the rest of his empire that actually that gives him the resources that can then save Twitter. And again, time will tell what happens there, and he does toe the line. But it's just, again, it really comes back to seeing the reality of the situation and seeing it through first principles.
if we now go on some more practical things, or maybe like less high level thinking, we go down a little bit more into the weeds. You wrote an amazing article around hiring, and you have some more strategic approaches to finding the best people for your team. Before we jump onto those strategic approaches, what feels like first principles of hiring for you?
Well, I think the biggest almost framework for looking at this from first principles is going back to the etymology of a company. I think there's a lot of value in etymology in terms of first principles thinking, because when we understand where a word has come from, we can better understand what that entity is. And a company is a great example. So a company now, we just see as a business organization. But the word company comes from, I think, the Roman word compeo, or the Latin word compeo, which is to break bread with. So it's literally the people we break bread with, So then coming back to that, like a company is just a group of people that we break bread with, basically. And that is it. Like a company is just a group of people working towards a shared objective. And I think once you start to view it through that lens, then you realize that like who those people are is absolutely everything. And you just understand that, it's all about basically building and nurturing that team.
So then one aspect of the people side of business, we've got what's the culture, we've got managing people, we've got firing people when they're not right for the culture, and then we've also got hiring. And you wrote this great article on hiring, and you talk about some of those three strategic approaches you take when hiring.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the first one is, I really like the interview question, the kind of very cliche interview question of what's your weakness, because you can just really see who like is genuinely interested in what their weakness is and who just has like a filler answer. And the people who are genuinely interested in their weakness, like what that is it's showing an intellectual humility. And that is then the trait that when something goes wrong is going to cause that person to try and understand what's the truth in this situation. Like be interested in that rather than how do I look in this situation. So that's the first thing I look for. I think secondly is really indexing for people who have been through failure. And I think a couple of big reasons behind this. One is that they're just undervalued by the market. So if you have someone who is fresh out of Revolut, then that is going to almost cloud how you see that person, because it's like, cool, they got the Revolut tick. They're going to come with a big salary to boot. And so I think the chances of that person succeeding just become much, much lower, because again, it comes with so much expectation, and you end up paying a much higher price for it. If someone has come off the back of failure, then they're undervalued by the market. So again, you don't want to underpay them, but you can get them for a reasonable price. And then also, it's when you go through failure that you really understand the fabric of the situation. So, when something succeeds, again, you might not learn as much about like the reality and the mental models around how it all works. But when you really see something go wrong, you're like, oh, well, that's why people give you that advice. It's like when you really see a company run out of money, then you realize like, oh, why it's so important to have, these contracts with various people, and, why these legal contracts are important to start with. So it's when something really goes wrong that you understand how the game is really played. And then last of all is people just have something to prove. Like I think if you've been off the back of a failure, like again, you're going to come in, you've been humbled, and that is then driving for the next thing. And then the third point is just something I heard Patrick Collison say on an interview once, which is a good way of hacking culture is just to hire people who are already happy. So I think, we spend so much time focused on like, how do we, get our employees happy, and, what benefits can we give them, or whatever else it might be. But if you hire people who are already happy, then that's just a much easier way to go about it.
So we're coming near to the end, and I'd love to stay on this people element, because I think you and I both understand and appreciate the importance of people in company building. And so I feel like we sort of touched on the management side of people more so with the sort of ego side. Is okay, how can we cut through the ego? How can we make people feel safe? And how can we just get to the truth of the situation, and support people through that process? And we've got the hiring side as well. How about you're going through a big period of change now, and you're completely restructuring the company, and you're removing the building of cabins and a lot of the management of cabins, and you're focusing a lot more on the marketing side, which will inevitably lead to quite a big shift in the dynamics of the company, and potentially going to have to let some people go, and you're going to have to maybe reposition other people and have to bring new people in, or I'm sure there are lots of potential futures or potential paths you can take, which ultimately is just a lot of change. How are you leading people through that change?
Well, I think the biggest element of that is just communication. Like, so many issues in companies come from just not being on the same page or not clearly communicating. And that's so hard, right? Like when you're doing sensitive things, like when you're changing the structure, then people are inevitably going to worry about what it means for them. And you as a leader have all of the context, whereas people only get bits of it. And, really empathize with the people you're talking to, and just really figure out, how does this look from their situation, and like, what do they need in this moment to empower them. But I think what's really important, again, is just understanding, like, the company is these people, these people in the team. And so just reframing your role, my role, as my role is to support them and empower them, and just look at everything through this lens, rather than, hey, I'm building this company and everyone else is just helping me. Like, it's the other way around. They're building the company and I'm helping them, And I think through again, it's how you view the world, and it's what is your perception of the situation. And if you view things through that lens, then it leads you to more obvious conclusions around, okay, well, I obviously, to empower this person to do their job, like, I need to give them this context, rather than, I am going to do this and I can tell these people a little bit, but like, it's not that important, and I'll just figure it out, and I'm sure they'll be happy to help me. And I think that's when people get into trouble. And so it's just getting rid of the ego, understanding that actually it's not me doing the real work, and my role in this is to support the company to get through this transition. So yeah, I mean, for us, where we are now, I mean, luckily it's come at a time where it's actually a good fit for the team we have. So there's not massive amount of change needed. But I need to understand that no one has as much context as me on this. And, it's my job to not only communicate it, but also just get people excited about it, and like, just really help people see why this is great and what's exciting, and like, bring the energy there as well. Because I think as well, when you're a founder going through a transition, like, quite often there are so many moments along the way that are like stressful and uncertain and all these kind of things, and you can come out of it a bit jaded. So it's really about injecting the energy and being like, this is super exciting. Let's get everyone pumped about it. And like, how do you just be that cheerleader in the company as well, which I think you're great at.
Very kind. That then comes back round to how we started it all off with, like, how the energy that you bring, and how important that is.
Yeah. I've been learning a lot about my health in the last few months because of these health issues. And one of the things that has kind of come out of it is like, everything comes down to energy in your body as well. Like, it's all about, your like cellular energy. So we've got our mitochondria in the cell, which is like the cell's engine, so to speak. And all of these issues, these chronic illnesses, all of these things are fundamentally energy issues. And it's when, we are not producing that and we're not at our most energetic. And that's the micro that goes to our whole body and then how we turn up in the world.
Irony of coughing right
Yeah.
now.
So that's it. So it's not only is it how we turn up in the company, but it's literally how we are turning up inside ourselves.
There we go. Last question. This has been so insightful and exactly the conversation that I love having. It's sort of balancing the high level mental models with the practical and coupling those incredible stories. So thank you so much for this whole download of how your mind works. Given that we as founders rarely get the time to sit down at length and talk about how we think about these problems, from this conversation, is there any aspect of what you've spoken about that has flicked a switch in your mind that's like, I need to do more of that? Like, I haven't been practicing what I preach, and actually that's something I could really get better at.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one that cropped up, and I also just catch myself on every now and again, is just this like busyness for the sake of busyness. Like, I am so much more effective than I was when I was running growth back at that startup, but I'm still so ineffective, and I still waste so much time through the week, and I send far too many pointless emails and have far too many pointless meetings. And I think this has been really useful to challenge myself on that again, and I'll go away and have a think about it. But there's just so much, we can all be so much more focused, so much less busy, and I think more productive as a result.
What a great thing to end it on. So thank you so much. This has been very insightful and shined a light on me in a huge way. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
I've got
A joy.
a lot of food for thought.
A joy to be there.